Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome. You know, history is not merely tardy in dispensing justice. Sometimes it's actually derelict. Vindication arrives only after reputations have already been immolated, livelihoods completely obliterated, and the human spirit subjected to sustained institutional cruelty and destruction. I've experienced some of this myself, but such was the deliberate fate imposed upon New York City's perhaps its greatest mayor, Rudy Giuliani, in the aftermath of the 2020 elections. What was Giuliani's violation? He zealously represented the interests of his client, the President of the United States, and for claiming that there were irregularities and improprieties in the vote count in Georgia, as well as other states, he was sued. He was targeted by vengeful state prosecutors in coordination with the Biden Justice Department, and he was disbarred from the practice of law. But they have not broken his spirits, and now we learn that Rudy Giuliani has been completely and totally vindicated. Recent reports concerning Fulton County, Georgia, have intensified the scrutiny of the administration of the 2020 presidential election and exposed extraordinary procedural lapses that show that Rudy Giuliani was right. In a December 9th, 2025 hearing before the Georgia State Board, Georgia State Election Board, county officials from Fulton County admitted that they certified approximately 315,000 early ballots without the required poll worker signatures on tabular tapes. This is a very clear violation of Georgia law, as well as an egregious breach in the chain of custody that observers use to verify ballot counts and authenticity. So in other words, when Donald Trump said to Secretary of State Raffensperger in a celebrated phone call, which there were 7 attorneys on the line, when he said find 12,000 votes, he didn't mean fabricate or produce 12,000 votes. He meant that having only lost the state by 12,000, with 315,000 ballots having been counted illegally, along with other ballots that were counted illegally, the state would have been turned. Right now, the U.S. Justice Department has filed a federal lawsuit seeking to compel Fulton County to turn over all used and voided ballots, ballot stubs, signature envelopes, and corresponding digital files from the 2020 race, alleging that officials have failed to comply with subpoenas and federal demands for these records. This is what is known, folks, as a cover-up. These revelations have triggered this new focus on election integrity, transparency, and the adequacy of procedural safeguards, such as local authorities, of course, have maintained control. Even as local authorities probably have maintained that errors do not in themselves provide intentional misconduct. That's not a peripheral procurator of some dilettanteous agitator grasping for relevance. This is a systematic failure of the system. Rudy Giuliani stood for decades as one of the most formidable public servants of the modern American age. As the chief of narcotics in the U.S. Attorney's Office of Southern District of New York, Rudy Giuliani is the guy who made the cases most prosecutors only dream of. He earned the love and loyalty of federal law enforcement officials who still to this day rave about his work and the support they receive from him. As the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, he actually oversaw a literal army of assistant U.S. attorneys who successfully prosecuted criminal syndicates with intensity. He was the first one to use the RICO Act, which decimated the mafia's command structure, destroyed white-collar crime and political corruption cases as never seen before with such ferocity. But it was as mayor that Rudy Giuliani achieved his greatest public service. I was privileged to be a volunteer on Rudy Giuliani's first campaign, in which he was very narrowly defeated by David Dinkins, who sadly was a nice man but turned out to be a terrible and indecisive mayor. And it was Rudy Giuliani's tough-on-crime, low-tax policies that turned New York City around when he won on his second run for mayor. The liberals and many in mainstream media insisted that New York had seen its best days, that the city was ungovernable, crime was rampant, jobs were fleeing, capital was fleeing, property values were dropping, and Rudy Giuliani is the man who stepped into that vortex. And then, of course, in the immediate chaos of 9/11, it was Rudy Giuliani who emerged publicly as the embodiment of civic fortitude, earning literally global admiration for his composure, his moral clarity, and his unyielding resolve. This is the man that the regime decided to obliterate because he had the courage to question the 2020 election. Additionally, he would be charged when the U.S. Justice Department decided that the formation of alternative electoral college slates was somehow an illegal act. Throughout our history as a country, they have a rich political history. In the election of 1877, in the election of 1960, John F. Kennedy held on to the electoral votes of Hawaii after the absentee ballots came in only because he had formed and certified an alternative elector slate. So they invented this as a crime in order to charge Rudy Giuliani and those good men and women in Georgia who stood as electors. If you read the minutes of their meeting, they make it very clear that they formed the alternative elector slate on the basis of their intention to bring litigation, and in the event that their litigation overturning or questioning the election results were successful, they were protecting their rights. They were nonetheless charged with crimes. This same playbook came from Nevada prosecutors. All of this we now know because of the Arctic Frost investigation. All of these acts were done in coordination with the federal Justice Department, whether it was Fani Willis' prosecution of Trump in Georgia, or whether it was Letitia James' prosecution of him in New York, or whether it was Alvin Bragg's prosecution of Trump in New York. These were all done in tight coordination with the Biden Justice Department. So it's important to note now that the people who broke the law and violated the Constitution, when their actions are being examined, they whine that they are the targets of revenge and retaliation, when it's not at all about that. So the declaration that Donald Trump won the 2020 election was sufficient enough to provoke institutional convulsions when it came to Rudy Giuliani. The vehemence of the response betrayed something more corrosive than just disagreement. To me, it revealed fear. What followed was not rebuttal, but eradicated vilification of a man, Rudy Giuliani, who in the 1970s did nothing more than enhance and protect this country. The attack on Giuliani's stature was earned through decades of public service. In one fell swoop, he was subjected to a systematic campaign of obliteration. Lawfare supplanted law, and the facts were lost. And now, Rudy Giuliani, thanks to these revelations and more to come, has been vindicated. Everything he said was right, and he's paid a horrific piece for it. When we come back, David Schoen, President Donald Trump's one of his top impeachment lawyers, joins us to talk about, an important pardon that he's proposed to the president. We'll be right back. You're listening to The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Audio Networks.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. Roger Stone Show. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Many people were shocked when on the morning of January 25th, 2019, when 29 heavily armed FBI agents swarmed my home at 6 o'clock in the morning that there was a CNN camera crew very conveniently about 25 feet from my front yard. CNN insisted that they were present based on their incisive investigative reporting. In fact, they got an award from the White House Correspondents Association for this stunning scoop of staking my house out 15 minutes before I was arrested. But at 6:11, someone at CNN sent my attorney a copy of my sealed indictment. She said, your client has been arrested. My lawyer responded, for what? And in response, she sent a indictment that had not yet been unsealed by a federal judge. That wouldn't happen until 10:30 in the morning. So I was arrested at 6:11. At 6:22, this document was sent. Now, if you examine the document, you find no timestamps or court markings, but you do, if you go to the metadata tags, find the initials of the man who wrote it, who drafted it, Andrew Weissmann. Andrew Weissmann is perhaps the single most corrupt, vicious, and sadistic, unethical federal prosecutor in U.S. history. I had read extensively in Sidney Powell's terrific book, License to Lie, Exposing Government Corruption in the Department of Justice, which chronicles Weissmann's misconduct in the Enron task force, a decision that he points to constantly without pointing out that his convictions were overturned 9-0 by the U.S. Supreme Court. He ruined both Arthur Andersen, a major accounting firm, and he destroyed the Enron Corporation and sent people to prison when there was no crime or sought to. This is the same Andrew Weissmann who reportedly locked a witness in the Enron case in a metal box with a slot for his eyes and left him in the sun until he agreed to testify as to what Weissmann wanted. A bar complaint regarding that particular atrocity that was filed to the New York Bar Association has strangely disappeared. A man who knows Andrew Weissmann well joins us now. It is criminal defense attorney David Schoen. To my mind, he's one of the finest attorneys in the country. He very ably represented President Donald Trump in his first impeachment, I believe it was. He has been a champion of a particular case that was prosecuted by Andrew Weissmann, and that is, of course, the case of two older, now in their 90s, organized crime figures, Michael Sessa and Victor Orena. David Schoen has argued that these men should be pardoned, but his letter to the president, which outlines the reasons why, is an indictment of the epic moral lapses and corruption and lies of Andrew Weissmann even before he destroyed Enron, even before he ran the Russian collusion hoax, where he has now been exposed by the declassified documents of Tulsi Gabbard. David, welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
Thank you very much. Very well stated.
So I'm going to kind of sit back here a little bit. Let you tell us about why you have written the president an extremely compelling account on why you believe Michael Sessa and Victor Orena, both of Brooklyn, who are serving life sentences in prison, should be pardoned or otherwise released. Compassionate release requires the approval of a federal judge, so you have written to the president explaining why these men should be pardoned. Later on in the show, Jackie Orena, who is the granddaughter of Vic Orena, who's incarcerated in his 90s, is going to join us. But why don't you lay out this case for us, because it's a tale to be told.
Yeah, I'll explain why I wrote to the president, and I'll explain why I put in a few thousand hours on a pro bono basis in this case. I've never charged a dime and never would, because I'm embarrassed by the injustice that this case represents in our system. And Andrew Weissmann, as you say, is right at the heart of it. He didn't act alone. He acted with other prosecutors of a similar bent. John Gleason, George Stembolitis were two of the others, Valerie Caproni. Two of them went on to become federal judges, somehow inexplicable to me. They had this end justifies the means attitude. And I've often said, in my view, at least after 40 years of practicing, but I've said it all along since I found out about this case in the 90s, that Andrew Weissmann is the single most ethically bankrupt prosecutor I've ever encountered. And and I'm sorry that I've encountered him. It was, at the time of these cases, there was a well-known lawyer in New York who was involved in one of the cases, named Jerry Shargel, and he would refer to Weissman as a pathological liar based on the Saturday Night Live character. He would tell stories about Weissman denying to him that any document existed in discovery, and then during a trial putting it in a stack of papers on his desk and saying, well, look, they've had this document all along. That sort of thing. That's small potatoes compared to what he did in this case with help of others. So I'll just tell you the case from the top. This could go on for days and days, so let me give you a synopsis. Michael Sessa and Vic Arena were accused of being members of an organized crime family, this is a so-called Colombo crime family in New York. In the 90s, 80s, 90s, there was supposedly a war within the family, two factions going after each other. What we now know is, and by the way, and these folks were sentenced based on the so-called war. What we now know is that a corrupt FBI agent named Lynn DeVecchio, operating under the supervision of Andrew Weissman and the others, was fomenting this war. He had a corrupt relationship, with an so-called underboss of the family named Gregory Scarpa, a murderous killer, 50 to 100 murders under his belt. And DeVecchio would feed Scarpa information so that Scarpa could then go out and kill a target of his. It was exposed when one day DeVecchio slammed his fist on the table after there was a killing, and one of the other agents heard him say, yes, we're going to win this thing. And so that became a book eventually, based on that line that he used. Cutting to the chase about DeVecchio eventually was charged with multiple murders in connection with this matter. During the course of it, a journalist came up with something he said it was inconsistent that a witness had testified to, and so they dismissed the case against DeVecchio. Nobody could believe it. Never happened in any other kind of case. Judge wrote quite frankly.
David, let me stop you there. We're going to take a quick break. But what David is saying here is that Andrew Weissman knowingly sent two men to prison for murder that he knew absolutely they did not commit. And he lied with other prosecutors to cover up that fact. We'll be right back. You're listening to David Schoen. We've got him for the next entire segment because this is a tale of mob warfare and government corruption that you won't believe. We'll be right back.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show, entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back. We're talking to David Schoen, criminal defense attorney, but also an attorney who has brought some of the most important civil rights, voting rights, cases in the country, as well as fighting Islamic terrorists in court. And he joins us now. He wrote a letter to President Trump that said Andrew Weissman was prosecutor in the case against Michael Sessa and Victor Arena, now both in their 90s. Of all the lives Weissman has unfairly ruined through his career of misconduct, the irretrievable harm he did to Sessa and Arena and their families stands alone. You wrote, he took away 33 years of their lives for crimes they did not commit, and he knowingly withheld the evidence demonstrating that they were not guilty. That is a very substantial charge. And it is interesting that you know that he did not act alone, that he acted in concert with others. Very specifically, a former judge, John Gleeson, was a prosecutor who was involved in the same cover-up and lies as Andrew Weissman. Gleeson would later make an interesting cameo. He would become a federal judge, and he would strangely resign that judgeship when questions about all of this began to be asked. But then after Attorney General Bill Barr moved to have Judge Emmett Sullivan dismiss the case against General Flynn based on prosecutorial misconduct that had shown up in a review of the case, Sullivan refused and instead appointed John Gleeson as a new special prosecutor to re-examine the Flynn case, which Judge Sullivan had no legal right to do. It was at that point that President Donald Trump got fed up with the shenanigans of Andrew Weissmann, who clearly suggested that. Why? His old partner from Brooklyn, the perfect guy to step into General Flynn's case. David, tell us more here about your examination of the misconduct of Andrew Weissmann in the case of Sessa and Arena, and why you feel so strongly that you've done this enormous body of work completely and totally pro bono.
Yeah, listen, Andrew Weissmann, you see that they've used him in pockets of prosecution around the country, as you mentioned, the Enron case, all of that, on the Mueller Commission, which is absolutely shocking that he would be the last guy in America to have been on an investigative committee president. But so just to summarize, in this case, Weissmann had this corrupt FBI agent, DeVecchio, working under his tutelage on these cases, on the Sessa and Arena cases and other so-called Colombo cases. And DeVecchio had this corrupt relationship with underboss of the Colombo family, who was a serial murderer. We now know, and DeVecchio has admitted finally on Anderson Cooper and elsewhere, that he knew that while he was so-called investigating this case, Scarpa was committing murders on the street. So while they painted the case as an internecine war in the Colombo family, it was DeVecchio and Scarpa fomenting murders and then making cases out of it to pick people up off the street. The ends justifies the means. Most of this stuff, it just started to surface after the Sessa and Arena trials. Sessa and Arena were somewhat suspicious that maybe something was wrong about Scarpa. They asked for information. It was all denied to them. All of the exculpatory information was denied to them by Weissmann and Gleason and others in the course of their case. Finally, a couple of years, a short while later, the evidence came out about Scarpa's corrupt relationship. It just barely started to scratch the surface. A very good judge in the Eastern District of New York in Brooklyn, Judge Corman, said, well, that's evidence then that should not be withheld by Weissmann and should go to the jury. In each case afterwards, 16 other defendants went forward in front of 4 different juries. That's 48 jurors. They were all acquitted based on the evidence that had been withheld from Sessa and Arena. Sessa and Arena have now been in prison over 33 years. That's twice the average sentence for, they were convicted of these, as set up murders in these cases, one each. That's twice the national average for a sentence in a case like this, even if they had done it. And so what's the kind of stuff we're talking about here? So in 1997, 5 years after the conviction, Judge Weinstein, another good judge generally in this district, started to get wind of this evidence. But at that time, it was that maybe there was a corrupt relationship. Maybe DeVecchio was sending information to Scarpa to help him commit murders. But Judge Weinstein said he couldn't believe it. Nevertheless, he said it was a close call as to whether the conviction should stand based on what he knew then. But he just didn't believe that this kind of corruption could have gone on. After this, the next step was the chief judge in Brooklyn, Chief Federal Judge, Judge Sifton, in 1997, wrote an opinion finding the evidence had been withheld and specifically singling out Andrew Weissmann for having a myopic sense of ethics, suggesting to be reported to the bar. This is beyond belief to me. The U.S. attorney at the time, Weissmann's boss, wrote to Chief Judge Sifton and said, please take Andrew Weissmann's name out of your order. It hurt his career. Chief Judge Sifton complied. He wrote a new order taking Weissmann's name out. I have both orders, the before and after, and I have the letter from the U.S. attorney. Nobody could believe that if I hadn't seen the documents. I think that's what gave Weissmann his license to continue the kind of corruption and moral bankruptcy that I've encountered, at least in what I've seen from him. So now, these two men have been sitting in prison, as I say, 33 years. So think about this. Let me just give you an example of the kind of evidence that was withheld. There was a police investigation, for example, in Michael Sessa's case. Who killed a person named Coluccio? We now know, which was withheld at all times before his trial, that there were something like 10 to 12 suspects in the murder, none of whom was Mr. Sessa. One of whom was Gregory Scarpa, the FBI informant who was killing people, we now know, on the street. They knew it at the time. As I say, DeVecchio has admitted giving Scarpa a license to kill. He knew that Scarpa was killing. We now have had a top echelon confidential informant come forward named Frank Sparacco, only in recent years, who said that he committed 12 murders. He, Sparacco, committed 12 murders while operating as a confidential informant under the supervision of these people, Weissmann, DeVecchio, and so on. It was known that he had license to do it. This is some of the most shocking thing I've ever heard in any case anywhere. So they also withheld in the Sessa case evidence that the primary witness the government had testify against him had been convicted of rape, was being paid a tremendous amount of money by the government. And let me tell you this, he testified that he knew Sessa had committed the murder based on a meeting Sessa attended. The victim of the murder was a person named Coluccio. Mrs. Coluccio, in 2022, wrote a letter to the court saying everything Carmine Imbriali, that witness, testified to at Michael Sessa's trial was a lie. Now, she's writing this letter on behalf of the person convicted of killing her husband. Everything he said was a lie. There was never any such meeting. Her husband and Michael Sessa were very close. She's begging for Michael Sessa to be released from prison. That's in 2022. I want to read you one other thing about Michael Sessa right now. So this is now from the two supervising correctional officers in the U.S. Penitentiary at Lewisburg, one of the toughest prisons in the country, maximum security prison, and is in where he's been incarcerated. He says, I'd like to testify about Mr. Sessa's steady and never wavering moral character. He says he's always been the finest example of a model inmate and a mentor for others. He would be a model citizen if released. He's the only rehabilitated inmate he's ever seen ready for release back into society. And the supervisory correctional officer writes, I'm a U.S. military veteran and will be glad to have Mr. Sessa as my neighbor. Another correctional officer supervisor wrote the same thing. This is just, these are in 2020, 2022. That's the kind of person he is. He was sent to prison based on the withholding of evidence, was denied a fair trial completely. Let's talk about Vic Orena. Michael Sessa now is 66 years old. He was never convicted of anything before this. He spent over half of his life in prison. He has children. He has a wife waiting for him. They've never gotten to spend the holidays with him, any of that sort of thing. And by the way, they both certainly qualify for compassionate release, but they can't get a compassionate release because that has to go to a judge in Brooklyn who came out of the same office as Andrew Weissman. Also unbelievable. Other people, everybody else in the case has been released long ago or was acquitted, as I mentioned earlier. Let's talk about Vic Orena. Vic Orena is 90 years old. He has every health ailment known to mankind. He has no idea who he is, where he is. One day he thinks he's president of the United States. Another day he's the warden of the prison. He's confined to a wheelchair. He needs 24-hour assistance every single day of the week. He has had heart attacks. He's had heart surgery. He's considered to be in terminal condition by the Bureau of Prisons. How on earth can a person like this still be sitting in prison for 33 years? But what about the case against him? He was convicted of killing a person named Tommy Osera. So as I mentioned before, Frank Sparacco, part of the top echelon confidential informant program that the Department of Justice has testified that he told the government, he told Weissman early on in the case that Vic Orena didn't commit this murder. John Gotti ordered this murder on his own agenda, and the Colombo family was against it. That's a memorandum. It never surfaced before I got a hold of it when Frank Sparacco came forward to tell these kinds of things that he saw. Basically, the story we've heard from these confidential informants is that Weissman, Gleason, Stambolitis ran the courts back then. They would tell the judges what to do, and the judges would comply, and no one would call them on their unethical conduct. It's absolutely shocking. And we see Weissman go on with a career like that. And so that's why I've worked on this case for thousands of hours, on my own. And that's why I'm asking the president to consider a pardon or to commute their sentences and let them go home finally. Look, Vic Orena at 90 and with full dementia and terminal condition doesn't have much to look forward to in life, but his family wants him home. They need him home. He's a grandfather. He's a great-grandfather. Michael Sessa has a lot of his life left to live. I've read to you already what the people who have known him for over a decade in the tough prison, tough conditions, for a guy who's sitting there and doesn't belong there. And they've said he's just a model. He's done 75 hours continuing education to better himself. He meets with a chaplain every week. He's Catholic. He goes to services every week. And Vic Orena, too. Vic Orena did a program with the NAACP. He got ordained as a minister in prison. Top-notch character before he had dementia, of course. And so these are the kinds of people, number one, should be released under any circumstances because of the amount of time they served in prison, double what people usually serve for these crimes, even if they did it. But secondly, based on, or maybe firstly, based on the kind of misconduct engaged in by Andrew Weissman and this crew in the Eastern District, they never had even the close to a fair trial in any way, shape, or form in their cases.
Yeah, it's really not surprising that Andrew Weissman goes on to be the general counsel at the FBI. It's in that role that he hears and knows that the Steele dossier, which is later used as a justification for the launching of the Mueller investigation, as well as for the FISA warrants to spy on Donald Trump, is a fraud. He's well aware that it's a fraud, yet he lets it go forward. I think most people understand that Andrew Weissman was the de facto head of the Mueller investigation. Mueller's subsequent testimony to try to bolster his final report was a disaster. It was clear that Mueller was already suffering from early dementia. Now he is completely incapacitated, according to his family and his attorney. So Andrew Weissman was running the witch hunt. He is the one who dreamed up the case against Donald Trump. He's the one who implemented the Russian collusion hoax, even though he could never come up with any real evidence of Russian collusion. And after spending $30 million plus, at the end of the day, he said, Paul Manafort passed proprietary polling information to a guy who was a Russian intelligence asset, and there's your Russian collusion. The problem with that is the man that he identifies as a U.S. intelligence asset. So Andrew Weissman goes on from this early history of lying and prosecutorial misconduct in Brooklyn to destroy the Enron Corporation and then to attempt to destroy Donald Trump. We're talking with David Schoen. I want to ask him about the legal surroundings regarding Letitia James, the New York Attorney General, when we come right back. You're listening to The Roger Stone Show. Whatever you do, don't touch that dial.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
And we're back. We're talking with David Schoen, criminal defense attorney, civil rights attorney, voting rights attorney, probably the smartest lawyer that I know. He's written a compelling letter to President Donald Trump regarding Vic Orena and Michael Sessa, arguing that Andrew Weissman knew that both were innocent, yet both got life sentences. And this is really not surprising. In the case of Weissman, he very clearly had me under investigation as a de facto head of the Mueller investigation, yet I was never called before the grand jury. He was in touch with my lawyers, but they would confirm nothing. And then when I was pardoned, he demanded that I be brought before a grand jury. It is an absurdity. And of course, in my case, as you know, David, the judge withheld exculpatory evidence that was hidden by Andrew Weissman. Specifically page 178 of Mueller's final report, which was long redacted and withheld from the public and from my defense attorneys at trial. Mueller's final report admits that he had no evidence of Russian collusion, WikiLeaks collaboration, or any other crime on my part. So Weissman basically constructed these process crimes in order to pressure me to testify falsely against Donald Trump. Yeah. David, with the few minutes that we have left, I want to switch gears with you here. Yeah. Letitia James was successfully prosecuted in the Eastern District of Virginia by Lindsay Halligan, who was the interim U.S. attorney. She took that case for mortgage fraud and bank fraud to a grand jury. They gave her a full bill of indictment. That case was thrown out because the courts found her appointment to be constitutionally faulty. That is now being appealed in the federal courts. But then it is reported that the government went 2 more times to the grand jury and could not win an indictment in what is a documents case, which seemed to me to be a fairly simple case. I mean, either Letitia James did or did not sign a document that, based on the facts at the time, was false. You've examined this case. What do you think?
I think based on the evidence the first grand jury found that Lindsay Halligan presented to, all, as you say, based on documents, they have Attorney General James coming and going. You know, I've written a piece to suggest that at a minimum, the public has to demand what went on here. Because if you read the indictment that was returned originally, it was only dismissed because of that procedural issue that you've raised. If you read that indictment, let's say there was a property in Norfolk, Virginia that Ms. James bought. And according to the indictment, she represented one status to the mortgage company, the bank, the lending institution. That is, that it would be used as a secondary home. And then, according to the indictment, represented to the IRS that she never used it for personal use, had 0 personal use dates, which would disqualify it as a secondary residence, and took some expenses as if it were not a secondary home, but an investment property. There's got to be much more to this thing. The questions that need to be asked are, did she take out an insurance policy on the home? Of course she did, with the mortgage and so on. How did she characterize it there? Secondary home, primary home, or an investment property? Did she ever make a claim, an insurance claim on the property? Was there any insurance fraud that went on with this? And again, the taxes have to be examined and so on. All of this was avoidable. Lindsay Halligan has done a heck of a job on very short notice, coming in here, learning the system, presenting the case to the grand jury, just based on the evidence, without an agenda. And so the court said that she wasn't properly appointed. All the Department of Justice had to do was have another prosecutor, an assistant United States attorney, sit in the grand jury room with her when it was presented. And like every other case in which there's a question about the appointment of the prosecutor, so far that's been litigated, the indictment itself would not have been dismissed, period. This is the only case that the indictment was dismissed because the only person who presented it was the person whose appointment is under question. But there are many ways around this the government the DOJ could have done with a commitment to this case. The public has to demand answers in this case. And remember, by the way, this was the second property at issue. There was a property that came up originally in which she apparently signed a document with 2 witnesses that was submitted in connection with a mortgage application that said to her lawyer that said this was the other property was a primary residence, a residence in Virginia, while she's acting as Attorney General in New York. There's a lot there.
Yeah, there's no question about that. The irony here, of course, is Letitia James herself, as New York Attorney General, has prosecuted people for this exact crime, the crime she was accused successfully by Lindsay Halligan, the interim U.S. Attorney. I do think that the government will prevail in their appeal of Halligan's appointment, but unfortunately, James Comey got off on the same basis, and his case has hit the statute of limits. Thank you for our guest, David Schoen. We'll be right back. And Jackie Arena, one of the victims of Andrew Weissmann, joins us.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show, entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
We've been talking about the de facto head of the Russian collusion hoax Mueller investigation, Andrew Weissmann, his long history of prosecutorial misconduct and overreach, his sadistic style. It is Andrew Weissmann, of course, who ordered the federal prosecutors involved in the Mueller investigation to delete the texts and cell phone memories of their government cell phones after they had been subpoenaed, or after they had been requested by special counsel John Durham. People don't understand that when Bob Barr deputized John Durham, who was a U.S. attorney from Connecticut, to investigate the origins of the Russian collusion hoax, he never gave Mr. Durham subpoena power. So those involved in the seditious conspiracy, like John Brennan, James Comey, Susan Rice, Andrew Weissmann, Andrew McCabe, and many others, simply stonewalled. My attorneys were in touch extensively with Durham, with very little follow-up of the evidence that I gave them of prosecutorial misconduct. So in retrospect, I think the Durham appointment was a sop that Bill Barr sought to get critics off of his back in the closing days of the Trump administration. And of course, we know that Bill Barr was presented now with absolute evidence of electoral fraud in Pennsylvania, and he called off the prosecutors and he shut down the investigation. Also, extensive evidence has now surfaced that he worked with Armstrong Williams and others to target other Trump supporters, including yours truly, regarding January 6th, even though I know nothing about January 6th, other than the fact that I spoke on the evening of the 5th, and that my remarks were perfectly appropriate. I exercised my First Amendment right to question the outcome of an election, a right that everyone has. I certainly did not call for violence, and I know nothing about any act that was later declared illegal on January 6th. Any claim that I was involved in, knew in advance about, or condoned any illegal action on January 6th or any other days was found to be false by the FBI. Reuters reported that in April. So having been a victim of Andrew Weissmann, he tried to destroy my life. He basically constructed process crimes against me, claiming that I lied about matters that were immaterial. There was no underlying Russian collusion to hide, but it was a very clever indictment written by Weissmann. No one would say he wasn't brilliant. I wanted to get another victim of Andrew Weissmann's on, given the fact that David Schoen has written an eloquent and compelling letter to President Trump asking him to pardon Vic Orena and Michael Sessa, two men in their 90s, reputed to be an organized crime, but both convicted for crimes that they did, a crime, specifically a murder, they did not commit. And of course it is the claim of the good counselor that Weissmann knew this the entire time, David Schoen. So joining me now is Jackie Orena. She is the granddaughter of Victor Orena, a man who in his 90s has severe dementia. He has congestive heart failure. He's a diabetic. He is blind from glaucoma, wheelchair bound, and has an aortic aneurysm, yet he's still in federal custody. Jackie, you have never stopped fighting for his freedom and fighting for the truth. You have been a victim, you and your family, as I was, of Andrew Weissmann. Well, I wanted to have you here to talk about this today. Welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
Thank you so much, Roger, for having me. I just have to start with saying that I'm so grateful to have the chance to share my family story. Unfortunately, both of us saw firsthand what happens when government power is misused and people's lives become collateral damage. So I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to have my voice heard. Thank you again.
I'm very glad to have you. David Schoen has laid this out, but I'd like you to lay it out in your own words, because you're the one who's experienced it.
Well, for me, obviously I was a very young girl when all of this happened. I was around 9 years old, so I didn't have a great understanding for what was going on, but like anybody else, I was reading the papers and reading the narrative that was put out about my family. And knowing who they are and coming from a very strong, close-knit Italian family, I knew they were good people, and I couldn't understand all of the stuff that was put out. And as I got older, it really became, I saw my family's battle back and forth. My father was charged, just like my grandfather, and was facing 4 different counts. He got a little bit lucky on some with all of the evidence that was withheld on my grandfather's case helped get him an acquittal. But the road to get there was not easy, to say the least. So I do want to touch on how I went from a young girl to now and what got me involved in this, because I saw that my family was battling this for a very long time, and they were frustrated because even after acquittals, we were unable to get my grandfather's case looked at. There was no appeals. The courts denied everything that we tried to do. And you know how exhausting that could be financially. And when you have a corrupt prosecutor in a corrupt district, it's virtually impossible to get the case looked at. So we were in a rut for many years. So that's why we're so grateful and thankful for people like David Schoen, who helped us all of this way. Dr. Topeka Sam, who I came across maybe 6 years ago after visiting my grandfather. These are people who advocated for us and really just, helped us power through some of these times.
Yeah,
go back,
I'm a great fan of Dr. Topeka Sam myself. She's a true fighter for justice.
Incredible. She's incredible.
She is relentless, and I admire that. Look, I understand that when you were 9, you began having panic attacks about your grandfather's incarceration, yet the Bureau of Prisons regulations generally say that inmates are supposed to be put as close to their family as possible, yet for some reason they sent your grandfather to a prison in Kansas when you live in Brooklyn.
Well, I'll break that down for you. So, yes, when I was a young girl and all of this happened, my father was also facing charges. So when my father went away, it was right after my grandfather, and my grandfather was convicted. And during my dad's trial, my dad was almost pushed to take a plea for one of his cases because Andrew Weissman was the lead prosecutor, and we just saw them bury my grandfather. So my father felt like if I'm ever going to see my kids again, because he was facing a life sentence as well, I'd better take a plea. Even though he wasn't guilty, he had to take a plea just to try to stay close to his family. And in that plea, the judges recommended that he was placed in New York, New Jersey, or Pennsylvania. My father was 35 years old, I want to say, 5 young children, all under the age of 12. Some of us suffered from severe anxiety. I had massive panic disorder. I couldn't even go to school. I would throw fits and cry. I couldn't sit through a day. I wasn't able to leave a visit without having a meltdown, and that was even when it was local. I wasn't able to go on a plane or travel because of my panic disorder. So the first thing that they did when they gave my dad this plea, and he took it, to stay in the area, was they shipped him to Leavenworth Penitentiary in Kansas, then Kentucky, then Illinois. So they made sure he was nowhere near his children. I didn't see him for his entire sentence. I was unable to get on a plane because of my panic disorder. Financially, with my mom being alone with 5 kids, it wasn't really easy to try to take a 12-hour road trip, and miss school and all of these things to go on a visit. So from about 13 to 19, I didn't even lay eyes on my father. And my father was like the most important person in my life. As a matter of fact, when they started getting arrested and he was home facing the trial and my panic disorder really started to take control of me, he was the one that would comfort me and calm me down. He was like my lifeline. So now, as an adult, reading the sentencing paperwork and seeing that these same prosecutors that made sure my father was so far away from me were the ones that were keeping paid informants who violated their protection, murdered people while they were being paid informants. They got to go to their desired facilities. They got to be in a bed in New York and New Jersey when that could have went to a father that wanted to be around his children. Instead, it went to men that were being paid, that were pulling triggers and killing people, being protected by prosecutors. So that's where a lot of my frustration comes now, because I look at my young child version of me and saw all my suffering. And a lot of people will say, well, if your family was involved in certain things or whatever, it's their fault. But no, these prosecutors knew my father and my grandfather were innocent of a lot of these crimes, knew that they were the reason that a lot of this stuff was, incited and went on, and they still had no problem with destroying people's lives, keeping them away from their families, and doing more damage, just so that they could get a promotion.
Folks, if you're just tuning in, we're talking to Jackie Orena. Her grandfather, Victor Orena, remains incarcerated for a murder he did not commit. Federal prosecutors, including Andrew Weissman, knew that at the time that he was sentenced. They have mistreated him extraordinarily, and we are going to continue to talk to Jackie when we come back on the other side. Also, get ready. We're going to be taking your phone calls at 800-848-9222. That's 800-848-9222. Or go to AskStone@RogerStoneShow.com. Send your questions to AskStone@RogerStoneShow.com. And then we'll be right back with a little bit more of Jackie Orena. This is a woman who has shown enormous courage as a younger woman and as a granddaughter. And I've seen her social media. She's never given up this tremendous fight to right the wrong done to her family. And we will be back with a little bit more of Jackie on the other side. So stay with us here on the Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Audio Networks, and we'll be right back.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back. We're still talking to Jackie Orena. Jackie Orena is the granddaughter of Vic Orena. Vic Orena was falsely charged with a murder he did not commit and remains incarcerated for a life sentence. It is absolutely clear now, based on evidence brought forward by criminal defense attorney David Schoen, that prosecutor Andrew Weissman and others were well aware of the fact that Vic Orena was innocent of this particular crime, and they let him go to prison anyway. It's not surprising that Andrew Weissman would go on to be the de facto head of the Russian collusion hoax. And don't kid yourselves, folks. You can see him over at doing as a legal analyst for MSNBC, where he's up to his neck in the Jack Smith extra constitutional efforts to destroy Donald Trump, the 2020 elections, and of course January 6th, through the actions of his longtime associate and protege Lisa Monaco, who was number 2 under Merrick Garland. So I think his illegal activities have continued. Jackie, before we let you go, I wanted you to have your say here, because it's not often you can get an audience here. We have a huge audience listening to you now, particularly in the greater New York area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Eastern Pennsylvania. I want to make sure that you've said everything that you want to say about what your family has gone through. And we have about 2 minutes. I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay. No pressure. Well, what I really want to say is this does apply to everybody, because how can we expect due process when the judges hold exculpatory evidence, prosecutors use paid informants? Every U.S. citizen should be afraid. I mean, it's so corrupt, and it goes from the prosecutors to the, agents and across the board. They're so quick to destroy our family name. They want to define us as, say, a gangster. But who's involved in organized, coordinated illegal activities? It's them. They're racketeering. They have violent crimes. They're allowing informants to get away with murder. They're aiding in murder. Lynn DeVecchio was a special agent, and we know that he was giving addresses for his killers, his paid informants, to go out and try to attack my family members. I mean, the courts knew about this. The prosecutors knew about this. This is such an abuse of power. It's an obstruction of justice, and it's really scary. So I just feel that all Americans out there should be aware of this. They should know their tactics and what they do, because if they could put innocent people away and destroy their name and try to make them feel bad about where they come from, they could do it to anybody. They used my grandfather and Michael Sessa as examples, and it's horrible. And I hope that people are out there. I hope that this message could get to the president, and that we can have some compassion for these men and, just bring them home. They were railroaded, and it's not okay. I want to start seeing RICO charges for these prosecutors and the ones that are committing the crime, because they're so quick to do it to our families. What about them?
You raise an excellent point. If you have listened to these interviews today with criminal defense attorney and constitutional lawyer David Schoen, or our great conversation with Jackie Orena, and you agree that Vic Orena and Michael Sessa should get justice, that they, in their 90s, both in poor health, that they should be released, then you can write to President Donald Trump, 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, I believe is the address, and tell the president that you agree with the recommendation of David Schoen in the matter of justice for Vic Orena. and Michael Sessa. Jackie, I want to thank you. Very courageous to come on the show today and talk about what I know, having been through it myself, is a very trying and difficult time. I know you have been guided by your faith and your family and your friends, and I salute you for never giving up in your efforts to establish the truth and the innocence of your grandfather. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. God bless.
All right, folks, we'll be right back, and when we do, we're going to take your questions. That number, 800-848-9222. It's Roger Stone on the phone, in the zone. You can call us on the other side.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back. This is the Roger Stone Show. Now, one of my favorite features of the show, where we take your calls and your emails. You can call us at 800-848-9222. That's 800-848-9222. Or you can email your question to me at askstone@rogerstoneshow.com. That's askstone@rogerstoneshow.com. Let's start out. Steve, in New Jersey, you have a question.
Hey, Roger. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you. I enjoy the broadcast. My question concerns Dick Morris. I've never particularly cared for him. I think he played both sides. He's very much responsible for preserving the career of the Clintons, right? And that gets you Hillary in 2016 in the Russia collusion hoax. But I've heard you briefly allude the problems you have with Morris. If you could elaborate on that, if I'm right.
Look, I think Dick's heyday was electing a serial rapist, Bill Clinton. In his own book, he admits that he suspected Clinton of being a wife beater, but he elected him nonetheless. Dick has largely fictionalized his involvement in Trump's 2016 campaign, as well as his role in his 2024 campaign, which, as far as I know, is none whatsoever other than kibitzing. I do recall Dick Morris insisting that if Donald Trump did not debate Governor Ron DeSantis, he would not win the Republican nomination, when in fact deciding not to debate DeSantis was the right thing to do, and DeSantis was vanquished. More recently, when, as I've been quite clear, I was given by an investigative journalist a letter from former President Juan Orlando Hernandez of Honduras, making a compelling case that he had been framed for drug trafficking by the Biden Justice Department. Indeed, Hernandez had signed the extradition treaty under which two narco traffickers and murderers were extradited to the United States, put on trial by our Justice Department, convicted, then turned around and served as witnesses against him, for which they were released from prison. That was the extent of their evidence. This was a frame job. So when I told the president that, in my opinion, having studied the trial and the evidence and the missing documents as well, because the proffer for the two drug dealers is something the government won't turn over, because it's clear that these guys walked in return for their testimony, which they had an axe to grind anyway. Dick Morris told the president that decision by the president to pardon Hernandez would cost the Nationalist Party the subsequent election the following Sunday. This was a Friday. Again, Dick Morris turned out to be completely and totally wrong about that. So it's just yet another example. And then, of course, who can forget seeing Dick on Newsmax when some fat guy in a wife beater walks around in the background. Still trying to figure out what that was about. But thank you so much, Stephen, for your call. Patrick, you're in Indiana. Welcome to the Roger Stone Show.
Yes. The most important thing I have to say is Trump needs to know that the Supreme Court is usurping their constitutional authority. Article 4, Section 4 says that the president has authority over foreign affairs. And Schooner Peggy versus United States in 1801, Marshall Court decided, Supreme Court decided that they affirmed the Article 4, Section 4. And the Supreme Court is trying to rule in this case whether the tariffs are legal or not, and they don't have any authority.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. What we have here is a war of judicial tyranny in which left-wing activist judges at the federal level, in some cases some on the Supreme Court, are trying to usurp the power of the executive. Donald Trump has to be able to declare an economic emergency. He has to be able to negotiate better tariff deals to get us more money and more revenue, just as he has to have the authority to deport dangerous illegal immigrant criminals. But the courts have also sought to hamper his ability to do that as well. So I completely agree, Patrick, and I thank you for calling. Don't give up your day job, though. All right, thanks. In the meantime, here's a question from Barry in Boca Raton. Barry wants to know what I think of the plans for the Trump Presidential Library in Miami. This makes very little sense to me. I mean, the Florida State Legislature gave the Trump Presidential Library Foundation a site of about 20 acres, as I understand it, that is near the Victory Tower, which is an important symbol in Miami. But Donald Trump has no historical connection to Miami. He's a Floridian, but if he has any obvious place, it would be Palm Beach County. He's associated with Mar-a-Lago and, of course, Palm Beach, and his successful efforts to not only buy that for a song. The tactics that Trump used to buy Mar-a-Lago are really quite brilliant. The state of Meriwether Post and the federal government refused to sell it to him for a bid of $15 million. He then went and bought the property between Mar-a-Lago and the beach, threatening to build a structure that would destroy Mar-a-Lago's view of the ocean. This caused essentially all other bidders to drop, and Trump is estimated to have acquired Mar-a-Lago for a mere $5 million. Today, despite what a New York judge says, this property, it would be impossible to appraise. It is such a historic property, and it has been meticulously restored to a level that is opulent, to say the least. There is no question that there are sites in West Palm Beach. I'm told, for example, that Don King, the famous boxing promoter, has offered Trump a site of 40 acres. First of all, I think it needs to be larger. The other thing that shocks me is that it's been publicly reported that the Presidential Library Development Plan includes a luxury hotel on the roof of the hotel. Now, presumably, that would be developed and managed without a bidding contract, presumably by the Trump organization. I don't like the optics of that, and I don't want a hotel and presidential library. I want a fitting presidential library for one of our greatest presidents, somebody who like Grover Cleveland, actually made the greatest single political comeback in history. We now have only two presidents who were elected, lost re-election in a disputed election, and came back to win again, the other one being a New Yorker. So I favor maybe making the Miami site like a library annex. To me, that would work. Here's another question. This is from Sarah in Omaha, Nebraska. She said that she saw online that Robert F. Kennedy would likely challenge J.D. Vance for the 2028 presidential campaign. Wants to know what I think of that. Look, I have the highest possible regard for Robert F. Kennedy Jr. I think that the fusion of the MAHA, the Make America Healthy Again, and the Make America Great Again movements created a new governing coalition, a new majority that is bigger than Republicans and Democrats, that allowed Donald Trump to win the votes of disaffected Democrats and independents and libertarians and other free thinkers. On the other hand, Robert Kennedy is not a Republican, has not switched to the Republican Party as, for example, former Democrat Congresswoman Tulsi Gabbard has. And therefore, and I cannot see, in all honesty, with the dynasty of Kennedy in his name and their broad association with the Democrat Party, despite the fact that that party rigged the rules to prevent him from openly competing for that party's nomination. I know some of his supporters would like him to run again. I still think that he's an able man doing a great job, and I think he's fully qualified to be president, but the question is, what party would he run in? He cannot challenge J.D. Vance, a sitting vice president within the Republican Party, in a party in which he is not even a member. And Vance gave a very, very compelling speech to the Turning Point USA America Fest event in Phoenix. We in our party, we don't reject sitting Republican vice presidents. We're the party that believes in hegemony, and we believe in waiting your turn. And I think J.D. Vance is earning this every day. I don't know what the future public service may bring to Robert F. Kennedy. He's already explored running as an independent. I think he's realized how institutionally and financially impossible that is. The machinery of the Democrat Party that changed the rules to stop him from having a fair competition with Joe Biden, who basically ended the New Hampshire primary and the Iowa caucuses and the Massachusetts primary, all in an effort to thwart the campaign of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., would have no hospitality for a presidential candidacy. And I just do not see him having the ability. Well, I just don't think he has the instinct or the intention to become a Republican, nor do I think that he would have a strong chance against a sitting vice president. I think there may be other candidates in that race. Ted Cruz certainly making noises about it. Sarah Sanders is a potential candidate. Tulsi Gabbard herself could be a candidate. That all remains to be seen. I think as a party, however, we would be very wise to focus on 2026 rather than 2028. 2026 is the year in which all of the Trump reforms can be undone. If the Democrats manage to take the lower house, you can expect another tsunami of investigations, phony impeachments, and a collateral noise, which we really cannot afford. I don't agree with those who say, oh, the 2026 elections are lost. We don't know that yet. I do know that in his massive tax cuts in the Big Beautiful Bill, in his regulatory cuts, in his the massive revenues flowing into the federal government stemming from his trade policies, and because I believe we will get a sizable cut in the interest rates from a non-politicized Federal Reserve Board once Jerome Too Late Powell is no longer a member of the board and no longer the chairman, because we should have had a deeper rate cut based on the current rate of unemployment and the current rate of inflation, and that has not happened. So I'm still optimistic that it will have a very strong economy as the backdrop for the 2026 elections, and the Democrats still offer us nothing. They hate Trump, or they speak of their hatred for Trump. They speak of the fact that he's a threat to democracy when they are the ones who are a threat to democracy. And then we see multiple members of the House and Senate, all of whom have either former military or former intelligence ties, suddenly urging members of our armed services not to obey orders from the commander-in-chief. I find that to be the epitome of seditious activity, giving rise to the idea that they may attempt some kind of color revolution against President Trump, as General Flynn has said right here on the Roger Stone Show. So when we come back, we'll take some more of your questions. Again, you can call us at 800-848-9222. That's 800-848-9222. Or you can email us your questions by going to askstone@rogerstoneshow.com. Whatever you do, don't touch that dial. We'll be right back to take more of your political questions on the other side.
The Roger Stone Show on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The Roger Stone Show. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the Roger Stone Show, where we're taking your calls at 800-848-9222. Marianne from Long Island, you've called. What's on your mind, Marianne?
Hi, Roger. It's a pleasure to speak with you. I tune in practically every week to listen to you, and I'm probably one of millions of Americans who are waiting for justice for all the injustice that has been perpetrated, not only to you, but the guest you just had on, and talk about Letitia James and the small loophole that could have been easily fixed that David Schoen mentioned. When are we going to stop being outmaneuvered by these psychopaths and step up and play hardball against them and put them in jail?
Look, I could not agree with you more. I've spoken out about it in the last couple of weeks. It was the heart of my speech at Turning Point USA. The obvious place, because I think there's a seditious conspiracy that begins in the Oval Office on, I think it is April 17th of 2016, continues through the 2016 election, the formation of the Russian collusion hoax. Then it manifests itself in two fake impeachments, outright fraud and irregularity in the 2020 election. Then, of course, the so-called documents case, the January 6th Fedsurrection, in which all the evidence, of course, is destroyed. And then the outrageous documents case, the raid of Mar-a-Lago. This is one continuing conspiracy, and that means that the proper place to investigate and bring charges would be in the Southern District of Florida. We've heard that Jason Quones, who is the confirmed U.S. attorney in that jurisdiction, is investigating. Fox reported several weeks ago of subpoenas going to CIA Director John Brennan, former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe, Lisa Page, and others. We've also heard this week that lawyers for former CIA Director John Brennan have confirmed that their client is a target, and they've actually had the gall to ask a federal judge to order the Justice Department not to investigate the illegal actions of John Brennan for, I guess, reasons of national security. But you're absolutely right. The left continues to say this is about revenge and retaliation, and Trump is targeting his political enemies. Just remember, they are always guilty of exactly what they accuse us of. When they say we are doing something under Alinsky's rules for radicals, it means that it's precisely what they are doing. So those who cooked up charges against Donald Trump, against General Flynn, against me, against so many others, have to be brought to justice. And if that does not happen, I don't think we're going to get the maximum turnout for the midterm elections. I think there are two things Americans want answers to. One, the 2020 election, both the machines and the mail-in ballots. There's more and more evidence, as I said. Rudy Giuliani's now been completely vindicated under new evidence of fraud in Georgia. Tulsi Gabbard has been charged with studying the security and the integrity of the voting machines. We await her report. But the other one is justice in the Russian collusion hoax and the efforts to really destroy Donald Trump, including those efforts in the New York courts. Meanwhile, James Comey walks on a technicality. No one ever looked at whether he was guilty of the charges. He was specifically charged with lying when he said he never gave classified documents to any third party and instructed them to leak them to the New York Times, when he did exactly that, according to emails that were established in the investigation with a man named Daniel Richman. Richman actually sued the government, and a judge ordered the government to return the evidence that James Comey was guilty. And this all would have passed had President Donald Trump not recognized that the prosecutor in the Eastern District of Virginia was preparing to give James Comey, the FBI director, a pass. This cannot continue. So the statute of limitations has probably run out on that case. It cannot be rebrought. The courts have wrongly claimed that Lindsay Halligan was appointed the as the interim U.S. attorney, I think that will be overturned in the courts as well. But where is justice? It is an excellent question. I'm trying to give Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche the benefit of the doubt. There are some hopeful signs, but in the end, will there be accountability and will there be justice? I think it is a perfectly reasonable question. And Marianne, I thank you for calling the Roger Stone Show and raising it. That's it for us today. Thanks, folks. Thanks for joining us. Until next Sunday, God bless you and Godspeed.
Thanks for listening to The Roger Stone Show. You can hear The Roger Stone Show Sunday afternoons at 3. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder,
what the heck is going on here?
This is Roger Stone. The holidays are here, and it's the time of year when travel, crowds, and cold weather mean one thing. Everybody's getting sick. And in moments like this, you don't want to rely on the bureaucracy, the nonsense, or the slow-moving medical machine. You want control. You want to be prepared. You want options. That's why I want to tell you about All Family Pharmacy, a company that actually puts you in charge of your health. You can go to allfamilypharmacy.com/stone, place your order online, and a licensed physician reviews it. Once approved, your medication ships directly to your doorstep. Fast, private, and secure. So whether you're looking for ivermectin, antibiotics, or everyday maintenance medications, All Family Pharmacy now has you covered. No waiting rooms, no runaround, no interference. This holiday season, don't gamble with your health or your family's health. Stay prepared, stay protected, stay in control. Visit allfamilypharmacy.com/stone and now save 10% with code STONE10. Take charge of your health because nobody cares about your freedom more than you do.